I'm Lisa Calhoun, General Partner at Valor Ventures, and I am so excited to welcome the keynote of the ninth showcase of Startup Runway, Ryan Wilson. He is the CEO and co founder of The Gathering Spot, which is far more than a company. It's actually a movement. Ryan, please take it away and share with everyone a little bit more about what you're building.
So first, Lisa, it's good to be with this community. I am so honored. I remember when Startup Runway started, and to think now at what a beautiful this community and beautiful platform that this has developed into. It's really humbling to see, and so I'm glad to be a part of this year's event. Even though we are not in person, there's still a lot for us to talk about. So I appreciate everyone for joining us. This is quite difficult times we're in as a community. I've been thinking about a lot, I'm sure as you have over the last several weeks. And one of the things that I want to discuss that frankly I don't think is enough a part of the agenda is just the importance of elevating Black owned companies and Black leadership within organizations. Now, some will say, why is this important? I thought we've had this conversation. Indeed, Black lives do matter, but I think it's important to put context around what we are seeing. There was an active discussion this year about Juneteenth, and one of the things that I don't think was reported enough is that if you go back to 1865, Black folks in this nation had about 1/2 of 1% of the nation's wealth. Well, if you fast forward till today, that's about 1.5% of the nation's wealth. So we've made about 1% gain over a 155-year period. There's a lot for us to work on. And so while conversations over the last several weeks have allowed us to get to know one another better and to talk about historic injustices that have occurred, we've got to continue to make sure that our community is focused on what's ahead of us. And as that applies to the startup community, there's tremendous opportunity. Black companies, like any other company in our ecosystem, have the potential to produce meaningful solutions, but also build meaningful teams that will have an impact on our world. I know it sounds obvious to say that we should prioritize these companies and make sure that they have an equal shot. I know that this community is with me in that effort, but it's important for us to make sure that we include folks that are not a part of this conversation. What happens when you watch Black companies scale are amazing things. It has an impact on nearly every other part of our society. If we're talking about education or housing or healthcare, the ability to have a thriving business ecosystem really is fundamental to the survival of all of those other parts of the way that we interact with one another and that the infrastructure that we participate in. So I didn't talk much about the Gathering Spot. I'll say a quick word about it before we continue on. I started TGS out of my apartment in Washington, D.C. with the simple goal of creating a platform that would bring people together. I had no idea what I was doing when we started. It was a really interesting time period in my life. I was working for a law firm back in Atlanta, and it was the same summer as the Trayvon Martin case. What was special about that summer is that I watched it every single day, so much so that the IT department at the law firm came into the office one day and asked me, "What are you watching in here?" And at the end of that summer, when George Zimmerman was acquitted, I got an email from some friends that asked me, "What are we going to do next?" And I sat on that email for a while. I didn't really know what to say to them. But when I decided to respond, I came back with an idea talking about what if we had a place where people could meet and gather and learn from one another. And so what we do at TGS by way of space is we have event space and a restaurant and bar and workspace, but the business has always been centered around people. We've taken an important and I think very special interest in the events of the last several months because our mission has always been rooted in engaging these issues. So Black leadership, which was one of the fundamental topics that I had to explore as a 23-year-old with a dream at the beginning of this process, is something that I've had to learn a lot about over the last several years. But what I've learned is that when given the opportunity, companies like ours that statistically, if we're just being honest, wouldn't have an opportunity under normal circumstances to even exist, go on to be able to have meaningful impacts in folks' lives. And so if there's any way that you can have an impact with a Black-owned business, whether that's being a customer, a supporter, someone that just says a nice word on the internet, any and all efforts during these times matter. Because indeed, if we're going to move forward together, we have to understand that it only is going to happen if we're being intentional and keeping our eyes focused on the power of what happens when good people sit down and think about the things that actually can get accomplished and then work diligently to make them so. So
So
glad to be here. I'm going to pause for a second. I know that was a longer intro that
that was fantastic. You
that
know, not everyone who's attending Startup Runway. We have a lot of repeat people. We have a lot of new faces. One of the exciting things about the whole pandemic process is it's allowed us to go digital. And our first home was at the Gathering Spot, thanks to the generosity of Ryan and his co-founder, TK Peterson. That is why the Gathering Spot is a co-host forevermore. Could not do it without the support of the platform and the team. But now that we're in a purely digital environment, we get people from almost every state who are really interested in, some people this is their home. It's diverse founders and inclusion and Black Lives Matter. And for others who are listening, this is the first event that they've attended in the
Sure.
inclusive ecosystem. So I just want to encourage you to riff on that topic of why Black leadership matters. Why do you think it matters, Ryan?
So I think this is such an empowering and powerful platform, because what we see here is what happens when people are intentional. I have to commend Lisa and the entire team from the beginning of thinking about how to make sure that founders that ordinarily don't have an opportunity to participate fully in the process. And what I mean by that is just as a founder of color, we see the statistics. It's very difficult to get funding for all entrepreneurs, but it's certainly difficult if you're a founder of color. This platform is important because what it does is it exposes us to what we know intuitively exists, great companies and great founders, but it also shows us leaders in our community that are doing powerful things. I've always been proud to be a small part of what happens with Startup Runway because, again, true to the mission from the very, very beginning, it's about making sure that we're being specific about who we're targeting, but at the same time, knowing that when we stand by founders of color, that there are equally amazing results that can come from those founders. And so today's event is a celebration of that as much as anything else.
Well, and I would argue that even greater results can come from diverse perspectives than the results heretofore. I feel like the investment community and a number of our attendees or investors have been satisfied for far too long with mediocre returns that come from homogenous sort of same old team approaches. And outsized returns come from outsider perspectives. And that's the power law distribution is fairly well understood in financial circles and doesn't necessarily come down as much to first checks. But the fact is, I was just looking at the US Census data yesterday. You know, the population under 40 is over half the US. Okay, that makes sense. Guess
Sure.
what? Half of that population is female. Half of that population is racially diverse. So the reality is
Yeah.
today our buyers, our customers, and many of our founders are living in a very intentionally diverse and inclusive world.
Yeah.
And if you don't invest into that, speaking as an investor, you will have missed your dollar. You will have missed your opportunity.
I think that point is so important because what it demonstrates is that beyond the moral arguments that have been used, and I think rightfully so, as to why we should work at the intersection of racial and economic justice, we also are starting to see that it makes just pure business sense, right? So if the moral arguments that you hear are not good enough, the numbers are showing us that this is the direction that our country is moving in, and that there are tremendous opportunities there that we should take advantage of. I mean, we've collectively gone through a history that has not allowed all founders to have an equal shot at this American experiment. But we are at a time where just the demographic shifts are making it so where we need to prioritize making sure voices that have not been heard are heard. And we'll see that on the other side of that journey that we will make an impact on our communities. We'll create jobs. We'll solve problems for people. But what we'll also do is make the returns that make all of these models work. And so I'm excited that we're having that conversation kind of in both ways, right? Talking about why we should do it, but also the just getting to the dollars and cents of it all, which I think is extra incentive to make sure that everybody pays attention to the shifts that are occurring.
Well, and you're making some great waves on that yourself. Without asking you to share any private company information, I would love for you to share with our viewers here in the community some of the growth you and TK have experienced at the Gathering Spot with your intentional inclusion and focus on diversity. It's striking, and in whatever level of depth you're comfortable sharing, take us back to the beginning and where you are today.
So in the beginning, we had nothing. I was in my apartment dreaming that one day we would have just anybody that would pay attention to what we were trying to create. So I'm grateful each day. I say more than being in the space business, we're in the community business, and that is what we're centered on each day. For any entrepreneur that's watching this, what I would say as a word of encouragement, one of my favorite quotes is, "You cannot lead people if you don't love people." And I think that quote applies to anything that we're trying to solve by way of a problem that a business is pursuing. It is super important to make sure that you love the people that you are trying to solve, whatever it is your problem, um, or whatever the solution is, rather that you're trying to craft. That you love the people you're creating it for. That to me is a part of our secret sauce. We stay super focused on the community of people that I'm humbled to say has continued to grow despite terrible circumstances, because we've stayed focused on making sure that they had connections to one another and connections to the business. And so that's both in sharing information and keeping folks encouraged, and overall with the knowledge that we've got their back. If any company pursues that goal, I'm pretty confident that you will make it to the other side of what we're facing as a community. But you have to remember to continue to love genuinely the people that the company has the opportunity to serve. Somewhat connected to that, and just one thing that I think is um, something that I try to say to myself to stay encouraged during these times, is that we are fortunate each and every day as entrepreneurs to be the people that get to solve the problems that our companies face. And each time that I start to get sad about any challenge that we have in the business, particularly, over the last several months, I go back to the idea that I'm grateful to be able to solve this problem. And then if I continue to lead with love and with a sincere interest of making sure that my customer base or membership community is taken care of, that we in turn will be taken care of. And so always focus, if there's anything to chase solving a problem for folks, and the membership community or the community around your business will grow. At least that's my experience.
I couldn't agree more. I think entrepreneurship is a response of the human spirit to solving the biggest problems our civilization faces. And it's impressive to see founders like you and so many in our community, so many here today doing that. And so, one of the things that we focus on at Startup Runway is that first check. Ryan, what are some experiences you can share with the founders with us today about getting that first check? And also, I'm going to be blunt and say, kind of separating the tire kickers from the serious investors? Because these days I feel like especially every founder of color is getting inundated with please teach me how to invest in a founder of color as if it's any different. And so I'm just going to let you take it from there.
There's a lot to say in this topic. The first thing that I'll say is that going back to the reason why you started a company, you need to take an assessment of why you got started in the first place and hold on to that. Trying to find funding is it can be a very difficult process, and I think in many ways is designed to test how connected you are to whatever your why is. So one thing early that we did is that we received a lot of no's, but when we received those no's, we tried to reframe them as seeing something in the market that investors didn't see. You may be talking to extremely talented people that are investors. There's many investors that are participating in today's event that are amazing, very well accomplished people. But I think that many of them will also be honest with you in that they don't see them all, right? And experience in one area doesn't mean that they see the problem that you're solving. You as the founder have to be the head cheerleader for your business and know that if anyone is going to be confident about what you're building, it's you. So don't let anyone shake your confidence in what you're doing, because it is the responsibility. But I also think more important than that, it's the just a unique opportunity to wake up each day and to be the person that's championing an idea. So do not ever, right? And I could go on the fundraising piece for a long time, but do not lose confidence. Know that you're the best person to solve this problem in the world, and carry yourself with the confidence that it's you every single day. Now, look, there are going to be a lot of people that don't want to join you on that journey, but I think that as you continue to get better, one mistake that I also made early on is that I didn't understand the fundamental thing that investors really want to hear, which is how are they going to get their money back? I would talk about really everything else. I would talk about how great the company was and the space and my passion for the business. And I think those are all things that a good investor will look for, but you've always got to draw those things to the opportunity. And so stay focused on why your opportunity is something that they don't want to miss, and let them know that as long as that it's up to you, you are going to do every single thing possible to make sure that this thing exists in the world. That is contagious. Folks will join your efforts, and it may not happen overnight, but it will happen, right? And I believe that as a founder, the dreams and aspirations that we have for our businesses, they come from somewhere. They're rooted in something, and you've got to know that even on those dark days when folks tell you no, and it feels like you'll never get the capital necessary, that there's a reason why you have the idea that you have, and to stay connected to it. Because if you continue to just put one foot in front of the other, uh, it will exist. I don't believe that there's any one person or institution that can stop a good idea from getting to market when people need it, especially if a good founder is pushing it consistently. So keep pushing. And platforms like this and communities like this, no matter what happens here today, right? This community, this network is powerful because yes, we'll celebrate a winner today, but we'll also create bonds that will go on to, I think, create meaningful opportunities down the line. And stay focused on that as well, because you never know that the conversation that you're having today in 2020 may be the breakthrough that you need in 2022. So play the long game, and understand that it isn't going to happen overnight, but you're the best person to do it, and it will happen.
Ryan, that is some wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that you're really successful at is building not just community as a business, but also community within your team. And one of the things I've always been impressed with the business you and TK are building, I've always been impressed by the inclusion that you have even in your team. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you actually see inclusion. I know you're sort of, flying the plane and building the wings, but a little update on that, and some experiences, some lessons learned would be really helpful, I think, for the founders in the room.
So to every founder in the room, understand that your team is your most valuable asset in many ways. They're the people that are going to be in the trenches with you each day. But there are different ways to build teams. As a leader, I prioritize making sure that I'm very transparent with my team, that they understand what my objectives are for the business, and then I work with them each and every day, every hour that I ask them to work on the business. I make sure that I'm available for it as well, and I let them know that it is my job each day to give them the tools necessary for them to be successful now. But because we're building a company that's scaling, I want them to be participating in that growth as well. And so focus on making sure that your folks know that you're with them for the long haul in the business, and that where they started might not necessarily be where you want them to finish. A lot of times I tell folks in interviews where while I might be hiring for the job that we advertise for, I'm really thinking about 6 to 9 months from that point where I will have a different need in the business and want them to be a person that will be well positioned for it. So encourage your team and know that, particularly in the startup context, it's okay to work with folks that have a ton of passion for the business. That if you're like me, I opened this business when I was in my mid-20s. You may have to grow up with your company and your team in many ways, and that's okay. That's a beautiful part of the journey. Believe in your folks, trust them, let them make mistakes. You make mistakes as well, and at the end of the day, if the relationship is rooted in that mutual goal of trying to make whatever your mission is happen, they will they'll be with you for the journey. So our folks, I'm grateful, have been with us since the very start. Not in the roles that they started with us in, but definitely still deeply connected to why we do what we do each day.
So, founders of color and women are certainly funded at extremely low rates, which is why we talk about underrepresented founders. And I know you're really familiar with this as building your business, but also you watch so many entrepreneurs in your membership base. What are some of the numbers that you find most meaningful? That if these numbers started to change, that we would know that this culture was changing and moving in the right direction?
So I look at three numbers, and I'll try to limit it to just three. I think the first number that we need to look at is just the opportunity for founders to have access to capital, and for their initial rounds to be uh, raised, and to have them be successful. Next to that, we've got to look at revenue. Unfortunately, we went through an era where revenue was seemed to be a little bit of a lost art, and depending on what business you're in, it may make sense. So I want to be careful there, that a business might take time to mature, but there still has to be an eye on making sure that the business at a fundamental level at some point can get to a place where it covers its expenses and has the opportunity to go on for more. And the third stat that I really pay a lot of attention to, that I wish that we talked a lot more about, is opportunities for employment. It is super important, particularly with founders of color, that we create capacity in our communities to allow people to be a part of the companies that we're building. Unfortunately, the stat normal has found us over the last decade or so, where around 90% of Black-owned businesses don't have more than a single employee. That's a statistic that we have to change. Next to that, it's a very high 80s in terms of percentage of the number of Black companies that don't, from a top line revenue perspective, do over $100,000 a year. We've got to work on that. So When we do, and we're specific about making sure that founders have the capital if they need to get started, that they're well capitalized kind of through the ideation and into execution, and have the ability to scale and focus on revenue, and then look at the impact that they're able to make by way of employment, we will be in a better place. Conversations about these things, great statements about these things are all well and good, but we have to make sure that the numbers back up what we're saying, which again will look like having more Black owned companies at scale, right? That if you look across, and this is, I think, the one of the ways that I would encourage everyone to think about this. There are not, no matter what industry we're talking about, a lot of minority owned companies that exist at scale in any industry. We have to work on that. We should be able to point to almost any industry and point to a minority owned business that we're proud of, that has gotten to significant scale, that we know is having a meaningful impact and solving a real problem. The fact that we can't do that in many contexts is the real opportunity that exists out there, and why, for the investors that are watching, thank you in advance for your participation in supporting these companies, because that is the start of the process to making sure that we get to a different future.
Well, thank you in advance for your participation, Mr. and Mrs. Angel and investor and VC out there. But also, I mean, which side of the bread is your butter on? Because, for example, Marlon Nichols, who is the GP and founder at Mac Venture Capital and was with us at Startup Runway just last May, he did a study with the Kauffman Fellows, came out February of 2020, and it showed over the last 10 years in 20,000 startups that diverse founding teams return 30%. That's like a 3-0. That's a big number, additional capital to their investors than others. And I tell you what, if that doesn't get your heart pumping as a VC or as an angel, I don't know what does.
Yeah, this is, again, this has gone beyond conversations of morality. I think it is the right thing to do, but we are looking at significant business opportunities here, and so I think that should hopefully be the thing that closes the loop here, because if we understand just the potential that's out there, we look at cities like Atlanta and all of the wonderful things that Atlanta creates. We should be able to say, alongside of our creative endeavors and our political accomplishments, and even what we do by way of sports, that we have companies that are in our communities, that are growing, that are providing opportunities for people and returns for their investors. That opportunity exists and is an open door that we need to really take advantage of in a way that we haven't. Again, I think that this is an opportunity, and why I appreciate communities like this is that we can have these conversations in a really intentional but plain way, where what we're able to accomplish here today, there are fantastic companies that are participating in Startup Runway, and if given, and I'll dare to say, when given the opportunity to be successful, they will drive all of the impacts plus some that we could ever hope for. So we've got to invest our treasure, but also our time in making that so. And when we do, I think we're going to, again, be really proud of what happens on the other end. It's the right thing to do, but it also is going to make the most business sense.
Is absolutely the right thing to do. And fortunately, it makes fantastic business sense for those that aren't simply compelled by that alone. You know, Ryan, you're the one, hearkening back to an earlier conversation we had, you know, Black leadership is very clear in multiple industries, whether you have music, you know, all kinds of arts, you know, but not necessarily in business, to your earlier point about how not every sector of industry has a minority led firm that is at the top of the stack, you know, the top 10 companies in that industry. Could you share a little bit more about why you believe that's the case today and what it takes to change?
Yeah, I've got a very short response to this one. I think it really centers around access to meaningful capital. If you don't have the opportunity to start, we know that the way that we have structured the way that companies get started in our communities, which a lot of times starts with friends and family. Well, if you go back to the beginning of our conversation, unfortunately, the wealth doesn't exist, the liquidity doesn't exist in communities of color to be able to meaningfully invest in companies in the early stages. We also know that there's a different risk profile with these sort of investments, but where we have to get very specific is standing in that gap and making sure that the companies that have a phenomenal idea have a chance to explore that idea with the capital necessary to actually make a true attempt at the business being successful. What we don't have, if we're being honest, and when you look at the numbers, is a lot of founders that really have that chance. Now, some folks will say, look, entrepreneurs, founders like yourself are always looking for more money. There's never enough capital in the business, and I will concede that on one hand, but say that the stats show us that even for similarly um, uh, situated businesses in a given industry, we still find that minority-owned companies don't get the same valuations and certainly not the same amount of capital necessary to really get going. That has consequences for, as we all know, if you don't start out well capitalized, it's very difficult to get into that position later. And it's oftentimes hard to have subsequent conversations with potential investors to fuel the business because you might not have been able to show the results necessary for that next round of investment. So we've got to start it out start every company, and like anything else we do, on a good foundation. And when that's set, we will see the companies that have amazing potential rise to the top of our communities, and then we've got to do everything from that point. And this is me speaking here, but to manufacture some wins. I think what this ecosystem could be more diligent about is picking companies that we really believe in and working really hard to make sure that the entire ecosystem supports those community or those companies rather, no matter what. Um, this approach that we have, that is rather, it's a shotgun approach. We believe that every company should have a shot, and to a certain extent, that's true. The ecosystem should support founders getting started, no matter where they come from. But at a certain point, we've got to take high potential companies and say, we are going to do everything to make sure that you win. And that might mean capital, but a lot of times it also means relationships and access to the right conversations to get those businesses to the next level.
Yeah, Marnique Woodard says that African American led companies are over mentored and underfunded. It gets down to write a check.
Uh, uh, she's a tremendous, terrific person, but I couldn't agree more. We have to be more specific about, sure, mentorship, but capital. That's the root of everything. I mean, in many ways, I was having a conversation recently where the company was talking about access to consultants and some folks that would be able to help them think differently about how to pivot the business. But the business didn't really have any capital to invest in that work. And so that is, as simple as it sounds, a lot of times the issue. We've got to make sure that the businesses have the basic resources necessary to go on and have a shot.
Absolutely. I was talking with a large university recently, and they said, how can we change the game around Black Lives Matter and founders of color? And, they gave me a list of things to choose from that I thought might be really important. And first I said, are you asking people of color? Why are we talking here? I mean, I appreciate that, but still. So after we got through that part of the conversation, the list was really everything but capital. And I brought up their foundation, their very large multi-billion-dollar foundation that invests in private companies, and how much of that is invested in people of color and how much should be. So it really, it's amazing how much people can twist themselves around the issue of not writing a check when it's very clear that Black families in America have a tenth the wealth of white families. To your point, gained 1% of wealth in 100 years. The issue is the elephant in the room, and it's about capital.
Yeah, and whatever word we want to use, capital, cash, resources, I whatever makes folks sleep better at night, but it's about making sure that the companies have what they need to be able to just have an opportunity to try. And I think that we can facilitate that as a community. We just have to be specific about what our goals are, and and realize that the playing field is not equal for all founders, and there may be specific interventions that we have to create to make sure that at least to try that is available to everyone. And unfortunately, where we are right now, that is not a statement that I believe is true. But through efforts like what we're doing today, it becomes more possible, and we move towards a time where it will become, I think, true for all. But we've got to stay focused on being specific. It is not about individual relationships. We are combating collectively a system, right, that at this point is not really connected to the individual's beliefs, but constructed in a way that, just again, if you look at the statistics, doesn't give everyone an opportunity.
Well, and I can say as an entrepreneur who is also a member of the Gathering Spot, your entrepreneurship circles and some of the resources you put in front of people of all types to learn more about how to grow your business, to connect to resources, to find the marketing talent, to find the technical talent, to find the encouragement talent, which it takes all of that. Is really, I just have to give a shout out. If you're thinking about joining the Gathering Spot, membership is not always available because sometimes it's oversubscribed, but it is really worthwhile. And having been a member for a few years now, really enjoyable. It has something for a lot of people, including something for me. So Ryan, I know you're really busy and you've been very generous. I can't let you go without asking for your top three, like, tips, lessons learned for founders. And I'm going to ask you to really focus on founders of color and share with them from experience your top three. Hey, lessons learned. Here's what I have for you.
There are a ton of lessons that I've learned. The first thing that I'd say to everyone is that, and I hinted at this earlier, but I really do mean this. Stay true to the reason why you got started. It is very important to realize that you're running a marathon, not a sprint, and know why you do what you do each day. There are a lot of things that will happen along the way that will try to shake your commitment to what you're building right now, but don't let them do it. Next to that, focus on building a good business that is fundamentally sound but positioned for scale and growth. One of the things that my dad said to me when I started my journey was, he said, "Son, small ideas will keep you small." And what he was telling me in that is that you've got to fight for the biggest possible version of your dream each and every day. Don't ever let go of thinking about the maximum opportunity that exists, and don't settle. Right? Again, there are going to be a lot of things along the way that are there to try to discourage you, but don't ever settle for a smaller version of that thing that you have always been inspired to create. And then the last thing is to make sure that, more than anything else, chase excellence in your product or service. Nothing beats really being committed to creating the best possible version of the thing itself. So be aware of your competition. Don't be afraid of them, but know that you're the best person to solve this particular issue, and you're committed to creating the best product out there. We live in a time where I think between social media everything else, we don't focus enough on businesses that are just excellent. But don't chase any of the external validations or headlines. Those things at the end of the day have very little importance to the business. Focus on building a good company, and if you stay rooted in your mission, take care of your team, and again focus on growth, you'll be fine. But I'm if there's any way that I can be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at the Gathering Spot. Um, I'm deeply inspired by the folks that I have seen that are participating in today's pitch. And thank you again to the investors that are spending time as well with us, because your efforts here today are making a meaningful impact. Together, genuinely, we can do something powerful. So maybe that's my message to everyone. Let's stick together. We will make it through. We're living in incredible times right now, economic collapse and social unrest. But I think that if we are specific about being there for one another, that we will not only get through this time period, but thrive. Go on.